Okay.
All right. So, just like an update for the past week, we have started working with Rosalind, and we have started trying to use Rosalind to edit and change files. We have some of it done. It's kind of like the documentation is kind of hard to read and find and kind of use, so we're kind of playing it by ear and just trying to get things to see if it can work.
So, my advice on that one is don't read it.
Yeah.
Go to the GitHub and download the sample code. Alright, there's the unit tests and everything that are there on GitHub. The documentation is useful, but as you said, trying to document a compiler is, fraught with difficulties. I wouldn't even know how to begin, really, to make it until everybody knows what they do intellectually, but not the mechanics. So I would go to GitHub and download the compiler, and it comes with a boatload of unit tests and samples, and learn from the samples. That's what I did.
Okay.
Well, I guess we'll give that a try. We haven't really tried that yet, so that'll be nice. What else? Oh yes, we do have a question for you, or a couple questions for you.
Well, it makes me feel useful.
What was the first one?
Where did the actual new DLL?
Oh yes, so we know that the assembly files, the DLLs, have the same relative path.
Yes.
But where did the new ones come from? Where are they?
Is this a metaphorical question, or?
Like, how will you provide them to us?
How are they being? Are they in the client code? Are they somewhere else we have to go and get? Where do they actually come from?
Okay. All right. So you can make up your own procedure, all right, if you wish, for right now. All right. So my vision was, all right, you've got a couple of processes that you have to go through independently, right?
Yes.
First of all, you got to build the mapping, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have to have them both in two different binary trees in order to be able to do that analysis, or I would think so, right?
Yes.
Yep. Am I clear on that one? All right. So you'd want to run. You have the new ones in one directory, and you have the old ones in another directory, and you do your reflective analysis of the binary compiled code.
Yeah.
Based on that, and if they're in a directory tree, one would assume that the two trees for the two versions are in some fashion or another lead up to the same root, as you would. All right, so you might have a C:\bin/bin/v1/assembly, and you might have bin/v2/assembly, right? As an example, all right, and you would be doing your analysis or reflective analysis based upon different trees. So when it comes to modifying the client code, as far as the projects are concerned, on first pass, it probably doesn't matter what you do, but the outline of what I just did is not atypical for this kind of problem, where there is a directory that carries the version number for things like this. So it would be entirely possible to say that when I start modifying the project files, that we follow that rule, that version 1 is in one directory tree and version 2 is in the other directory tree, and otherwise they are the same. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
By the time that we're...
Rather than just being an arbitrary thing, I would say, all right, let's assume that the assemblies are in. Now, what you could also do with that, if you wanted to go the extra step, is that when you did your binary tree analysis for to get the reflective type analysis, you could also save in your database model, if you would, the assembly name as well as the relative file location. All right, and that would give you another thing that you could do when you're doing your cross mapping. Okay, that's kind of how the approach that I've taken with a lot of these things is that I've not modeled. I've modeled not only the. Are you guys on the where you can do? Do we ever get a screen sharing thing worked out where you guys can see a screen?
So the web version has screen sharing available, but for some reason it never seems to work. And the free link client doesn't have like web or screen sharing as one of its features.
There's always a catch.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have some model. I was just thinking. I have a model of something I've done that's similar to what you're going mapping exercise. But basically, when you're laying it, which I was going to share just to show you the database layout more than anything else. But you can imagine what it is. So you have a table for classes and you have a table for assemblies, and they're related to one another, and the assemblies have a file path into it. So if you were doing such a model, then you could keep in your model the relative position of the two assemblies, and then use that information when you're doing your project modifications. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and again, these are all just, there is no right or wrong answer. All right, it is an answer that leads to, it is a kind of a design choice that leads to a solution. That's kind of and it's always difficult. It's always difficult to.
That worked.
It's always difficult, more difficult probably to adjust for
Use the
things
one.
by command line arguments than it is to actually think about how to putting a modeling constraint on it to begin with. Right? Such as, we're going to assume you have two directory trees, we're going to do the analysis, we're going to assume that they're relative to a root together, we're going to store the relative path to the assembly, and we're going to modify the code appropriately.
All right. By the time that we're using Roslyn to read the client project, will the client project be compiling with the old SDK?
Well, boy, you're going a step further than I had actually imagined you would go. All right, so the answer is yes, you have to assume if you're going to look at having Roslyn compile things, that's certainly the case. One of the things I was thinking, there is I have to go look at code here for a second. Hang on just a second. I can't remember what the name of the class is. Well, I can find it quickly. Let's see. Have you guys discovered C# syntax tree.parsetext?
I mean, yeah, we know of it. That's not what we're using, though.
Well, I would argue that that's really all you need to use.
I mean, right now we're just getting it straight from the document.
Yes. So get the syntactical tree from. So there's a couple of questions, and here I'll actually explore places. I've used this particular feature a lot. So when I was thinking about this process, now that you guys know about it, it seemed to me that this might be all that we actually need. We don't, at least from Roslyn, is parsing the syntax tree so we can find the namespace declarations we're interested in. And then, I forget what the syntax is to rewrite the code out of that.
Does that class have access to like the class names and symbol names as strings that we can read from?
But so the syntax tree will have exactly the shape of the source code down to the space, down to the white space that you see in the code. So it will have in the syntax tree namespace declarations. All right. So as a thing, I don't remember what the particular type is, but they'll be namespace. So you're really looking at, and it will also have. So let's take this in a couple of steps. All right. So one of the things is the class doesn't change. The class name doesn't change, but the namespace changes. So that becomes a small editing job. Okay. All right. Now, when you actually get down to being able to modify the internal code, such as the class name has now changed, and I have to modify the declarations. Then again, you have to look at how the class names are being used, because if the class names are implicit, i.e. the code has been written with the C# term var instead of with a type name, then again you have nothing to do. Change the namespace, and as long as the type is known by what piece of code that's doing the assignment, you have nothing to change. All right, so then you have the problem of which I think is maybe a bridge too far, which is that the syntax of the new method call has changed, and we're not really dealing with situations in this part. I may ultimately have that as a task for my group, but for you guys, I thought that would be a stretch goal to actually change code. Certainly, if there are places in the code where the class name is used explicitly, then we would need to go the next step and make that leap into how the compiler truly understands it. But for the most part,
That's what we were doing yesterday.
yeah. But that's going to be an edge case. Most modern programming internally to the code is using the implicit typing pattern. So you're really only looking at member declaration problems, and then that in a couple of ways, all right? So, for instance, again, member declarations are something you'll find explicitly in the syntax tree, all right? So if your member declaration can be parsed out and it references a type name that is in your path, as it were, then you have a couple of, in other words, one of the types in the old first SDK and one of the types in the second SDK have different names. And that name is used to assign a member variable of class. That's a specific problem that I'm talking about at the moment. So now you have a simplicity model to think about first. Yes, it would be cool to actually have the fully compile, so the syntax tree that you get is essentially the parser's view of the code translation unit. So the next step would be to actually understand how the compiler would put this piece together, which means you would have to actually understand that it was referencing something from the old SDK, this is the path you were going, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. All right. So, my guess, all right, is that would be very interesting to do for me anyway. I hope you guys are learning something. So, but that might be overkill for the problem. All right. I don't know. I can't say that the problem won't exist. Okay, you'll get away just looking at the textual equations. In other words, all right, I open up a piece of source code with the syntax tree parser. I navigate the parser and find all the namespace declarations. Are any of the namespace declarations in this piece of code things that I'm interested in? If the answer is no, then I don't need to do any compiling at all of that particular code element. All right. If the answer is yes, then I know automatically that from your mapping code what pieces have to change as far as namespace declarations are concerned. So the next thing to do is to look at all of the member declarations that are in the class and determine whether or not those member declarations in the class are in your set of from classes. All right. And if they are, again, simple text substitution should be easier than running it through a full compile. At least that's my working hypothesis. Were I going to do this is how I would do it first. And I would only resort to having the compiler actually generate the full expression compiled syntax tree if I were in a position where I couldn't tell anything about it. Now I'm open to you guys exploring where you're going and seeing if that is more efficient. Certainly it is something to look at, but my guess is that because of the way the syntax tree is expressed, it would be faster not to go that path. That's just my guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Alright. So, actually, maybe, do you guys know what is meant by a spike? A spike is a term that's used usually when you're learning something or you study something very intensely for a very short time box period of time. All right.
Okay.
So I would say, as far as your project management goes, is now we have two different ways of addressing the problem. The way I just explained, which might be simpler, and the way that you were headed, which might be more detailed. All right. So you probably need, maybe you divide it into groups, or maybe one person is already expert in one, you need to look at the other. However you want to do it, you probably want to investigate each of these things a little bit more intently for a time box period of time. All right, say between now and tomorrow afternoon, you're going to make a decision about which way to go. Or Monday, as the case, whatever you think you can do. Right? You have to make a choice about which way to go, because you only got a finite amount of time, and you have to decide which one which methodology satisfies the goals most correctly.
Okay.
and most easily. All right. So again, that's so the approach that you're taking is perfectly valid. I would suggest that you need to look at this other one, but I have no problem with where you're headed either. On my side of things, there is probably some minor. There are advantages to the approach you're taking that might be important, but I'm hesitant to say that it's the most that anything but the 5% rule would fall. 5% of the code would fall into the pattern where that's really necessary. Simply from what I know of the code base. If I were a general purpose tool for the general public, I would say you're headed down the right pathway.
Okay. So just to clarify, do you have a list of the things that you are expecting us to change versus like what the stretch goals are? So we've been kind of under the assumption that we're just trying to do as much as we can, which I mean that's good, but we kind of want like a definite list of what you're expecting from us versus stretch goals. So like we know we're supposed to do like go ahead.
I thought I had done that in the presentation I did, but yes, I will send you something. But basically, right, namespace declarations, all right, are the principal thing that we are going to run into in our own code. Things are moving.
Okay, and so by namespace declarations, you mean like using statements and then like fully qualified names inside of the code base?
That's correct.
Okay.
Using statements in particular have to be potentially adjusted.
Yes.
And fully qualified names. Now, fully qualified names are a little bit tricky to do the way that I was just describing. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you might have to understand the structure of the assembly in more detail than trying to do it in the source path. So the compiler, the fully compiled model might be more advanced in dealing with those particular problems for fully qualified names. I would have to think about that some myself. So anyway, namespaces, fully qualified names, and member declarations.
All right, and when you say member declarations, you mean things on the right side of the equal sign, correct?
Well, let's see.
Like when you declare something in a class?
So when you declare like a new class, are you saying like var like test equals new class and that class will change? Are you saying like class, like test equals new class and we change both sides?
Yeah, all right, so syntactically, all right, again, this is from usage. Let's see, we have three problems. Well, let's see, all right, so using statements. All right, let's go back to the list. Using statements. Fully qualified names.
All right.
Member variable declarations. All right, so a class with an attribute.
Yeah.
The attribute has to change. All right. And then when we get down into the code, this is where the stuff you were working on is actually more valuable, and maybe even in the fully qualified name bit. Most of our code uses implicit typing, so the thing on the left side of the equal sign is a excuse me, a bar, not a type.
Yeah, okay.
On the right side of the equal. Now, most of our code uses factory patterns.
Okay.
So you probably won't see a new, you'll see it's called to a static factory that sets the type in question as a parameter. Alright, so again, this is someplace where your idea might actually be superior. My guess from knowing our code base is we will have mostly the same class names everywhere. They'll just be in different namespaces. There will be a few of these other things. So I'm trying to see where your explorations will lead you with regards to knowing my code base versus the approach of being complete. All right. If we can get to completeness, that would be great. If you can actually find all of the edge cases that I see are the things that could be done by textual analysis, are parameters in method calls that have the type of keyword in front of them. I'm a type of X, all right, and X is one of the classes we're migrating, and its spelling has changed. Again, it's really hard for me to say which way is better. I can tell you from what I know so far of the code base, I've been doing code reviews forever, it seems, that the chances of finding a changed class name are in the 10% or less. So putting a whole lot of effort into either the fully qualified name. The fully qualified name nearly has to be addressed, but looking for type name changes might be something that's beyond the pale. I'm going to ask you you think is the best? I don't know. You don't get that from an advisor very much, do you? I'm supposed to be all-knowing and all-seeing. Oz the Great. I like your thinking. It is more complete than the way that I was thinking I might approach it at first. So I would say pursue it to the point that you can make a decision.
Okay.
All right.
All right. But again, the bang for the buck for me is using statements and fully qualified names. So another thing to think about is maybe a merge of the two approaches is better.